Hey, what's up everybody? Anyextee here, and welcome to a very special Columbus Day, or shall we say Indigenous Peoples Day, edition of my Adept Expedition series here on YouTube. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to have to use my iPhone for the entire episode because my DSLR camera is in a repair shop. It ceased to function after a recent visit during the equinox to the Gungy Stone Complex in Groton, Connecticut. But I promise to deliver a really cool episode for you today because we're in my home state of Massachusetts, specifically Westford, Massachusetts, at the Westford Knight stone marker site. Behind me, this carving is known as the Westford Knight. However, it's known to the Knights Templar as Sinclair Rock, or the Sinclair Stone. Stick with me because we're going to go over a brief history of the Knights Templar and the hidden or untold story of discoveries in America that predate Columbus.
In the year 1873, the Massachusetts Gazette reported a crude figure carved into the ledge in Westford Center, attributing it to the indigenous people of that area. Almost 100 years later, archaeologists studying the site determine it's not only a carved effigy of a knight in armor, but they identify the sword and an emblem that belonged to the Gun clan, kin to the first Sinclair Earl of Orkney, who was associated with the Knights Templar. I recently had an opportunity to learn more about the continuation of the Knights Templar from the United States Grand Prior himself, Timothy Jones, pictured here to my right, who transmitted the historical chronology of the Templars to me during his presentation at Dighton Rock.
So the history of the Knights Templar is very shrouded in mystery. It's very complex. There's a lot of different theories. However, I'm going to give you a basic primer if you're not familiar with the Knights Templar. So there was a group of, it's believed, 9 knights. Now 9 is a number of strength. It's also symbolic for completion. I mean, that goes back to ancient Kemet and the Egyptians. It's thought that there were 9 Knights Templar, and they also possibly had assistants with them, in addition to a caravan of pilgrims that they would escort from Europe to Jerusalem. Now, one of the first crusades in Jerusalem actually caught them by surprise because they were very successful, and so that eventually opened up the passageway for them to travel from Europe to Jerusalem, and they were able to escort pilgrims back and forth. Now, during this time in the Middle East, you had prominent mystical sects. If you look at the history of Western esoteric organizations, you will find the Sufis and Fatars and those who practiced the ancient sciences, the Kemetic sciences that came out of Egypt, and Hermeticism. These are Rosicrucian concepts, and Rosicrucianism in general figures prominently with the Knights Templar, who have the cross symbol ad rosum per crucium, ad crucium per rosum. Knights Templar clearly lived by way of the cross. Many believe that Freemasonry and the Rosicrucian organizations come from these traditions and these lineages, which include the Knights Templar. And previously to the Knights Templar, these ideas that came out of the Middle East were also part of the Essenes and other mystical sects, the Therapeutae, and actually further back in the ancient Egypt, Kemet, and possibly even pre-dynastic stuff that goes further back. I mean, there's all sort of theories when it comes to Atlantis and Lemuria. We can't say with certainty, but we can say that there is evidence of the mystery schools in ancient Egypt, and from there, again, it gets into the Essenes and different various sects, which this knowledge is then passed down to the Knights Templar, and a lot of these ideas are preserved in Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism and other Western esoteric organizations. Now, when it comes to the Knights Templar, and it took really about, well over a decade, about 11 years where they're loosely organized before they were fully authenticated and sanctioned by the bishop. And so they started to serve as an army for the bishop and for the church. and that's when they officially became the Knights Templar. And because of this, the church was able to garner donations and get them land, and through that, the Knights Templar became very powerful. They had amassed a lot of wealth and a lot of land for centuries of bringing pilgrims back and forth from Europe to Jerusalem. However, it was the French king who, during times of financial strife, there was a lot of issues going on there, and perhaps somewhat of jealousy for the Knights Templar, took action against the Knights Templar and actually arrested and then assassinated a significant portion of the Knights Templar. However, there was members of the Knights Templar that were able to escape and branch off, going to safe havens in Scotland and Portugal. Continued on eventually as the Portuguese Knights of Christ. There's another order, the Abbés, who carried these traditions that came from, and teachings that came from the Knights Templar. On the other hand, you had those that went to Scotland. Now in Scotland, we have Prince Henry Sinclair.
It's believed that this stone carving commemorates a fallen member of the party of Henry Sinclair, who made a voyage to the New World in 1398, traveling to Nova Scotia and then on to New England. The knight carved into this stone is thought to be Sir James Gunn, a member of Clan Gunn, and a Knight Templar who reportedly traveled with Sinclair.
So a lot of this is new. They just recently added this knight here. You can see the stone. This is where the carving is. It's now being protected, protect from acid rain, and try to reduce the erosion to the rock so further studies and tests can be conducted. Here is obviously the knight commemorating the site. We have a stone over here which acknowledges Prince Henry I Sinclair of Orkney, who was born in Scotland, who is associated or a member of the Knights Templar. However, it was actually Sir James Gunn that we believe died here. There's documentation to show that he had transgressed here, and so it's believed that he may be the knight represented in this stone. We can tell that because in the carving itself there is an image of a sword, and the sword is broken.
The monument next to the knight commemorates this interpretation, stating as fact that Sinclair and his party traveled to present-day Massachusetts almost 100 years before Columbus, who never actually stepped foot in North America, but instead landed in the Bahamas before traveling further south to Central and South America.
Now, while Sir James Gunn's death may very well be one of the first recorded accounts of a European death on American soil, he and Sinclair were not the first to discover America before Columbus. As we know, they and the Knights Templar had access to maps that were left behind by the Vikings, and the Vikings had come to North America. In addition, there's other theories that support, and evidence that supports other ethnic groups may have been here, and other pre-Columbian Europeans. For example, the Carthaginians and the Phoenicians. There's actually a coin artifact which looks like a world image, and they may have had knowledge of the New World, and they may have come here. Dighton Rock in Massachusetts is thought to have Phoenician script. Also Ogham, which would suggest ancient Druids and ancient Irish monks may have come here to North America. And we have the mysterious stone chambers in North America, which academics say are attributed to the colonial farmers. However, there's a lot of evidence to suggest these mysterious stone chambers actually date back much further back. And, you know, the thing that is interesting is we never hear about the other ethnic groups. You know, for example, it's possible the Egyptians and even the Chinese came to North America in the 1400s. And when you dig deeper into that and research that, you will find that they were actually led by a Muslim from, you know, the Middle East, who helped them navigate their way to North America. Which brings me to the point of the quiet elephant in the room, and one of the richest men in history. And I'm not talking about the Rockefellers and Rothschilds. I'm talking about Mansa Musa of West Africa, the Malian who came to power when his brother left the throne for him, basically, to go out and search the Atlantic Ocean. Took a party based on his knowledge of Moorish navigators and actually folks from Sudan who have claimed to sail the Atlantic, and he left and never returned. So it's quite possible he found his way to America. And you know, we find these mysterious stone chambers scattered throughout New England that academics tell us are the product of colonial farmers, yet there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they actually date much further back. Is it possible that Mansa Musa's brother and his people are responsible for building these stone chambers? It's not often that we hear these other ethnic groups like the Chinese or the Africans or Arabs when we hear about the list of contenders of pre-Columbian peoples who may have come to North America. And doesn't this seem a bit unfair? I find it a bit disturbing. It's as if to imply the only people that could possibly make such great discoveries are only Europeans. Let alone the fact, you know, that we have over 500 distinct tribes that make up over 1 million people that inhabited the Americas long before Columbus came to America. With that being said, happy Indigenous Day, everybody. I hope you found this episode interesting. I've left out a lot of information. There's obviously a lot more that I could have said, so feel free to add on and drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Thanks for checking out Adept Expeditions.